Varakethsar moved through the crowded observation deck of Nexus Station 7 with the fluid grace of a born predator, her silver-scaled body catching the artificial light as she weaved between the countless alien species that called this place home for however long their business required them to stay. She was Silverin, and among the stars her kind were known as hunters without equal, apex predators who had clawed their way to the top of their world's food chain and then expanded outward to claim hunting grounds across a dozen systems. Her people had evolved on Silvar Prime, a gentle world of warm forests and shallow seas where prey was plentiful and the weather was kind. And in that paradise they had become perfect killing machines with venom that could drop a creature 10 times their size, and claws that could slice through bone like water through sand. For 3,000 years the Silverin had practiced the Velthaner, the sacred hunt that marked the transition from youth to adulthood. And in this ritual, young hunters were required to stalk and kill sapient prey from what they called the lesser species. It was not cruelty in their eyes, but simply the natural order of things. For predators hunted and prey died, and that was how the universe had always worked. Vera had waited her entire life for this moment, training since she could walk in the arts of stalking and ambush and the killing strike. And now at last she had come to Nexus Station 7 to find her prey and prove herself worthy of the hunter's mark that would be tattooed across her face. When she returned victorious, the observation deck was her favorite hunting ground for selection, because it attracted the weak and the distracted, creatures who came to stare at the stars instead of watching their surroundings. And such foolishness made them perfect targets. Her golden eyes scanned the crowd with predatory focus, dismissing species one by one as either too dangerous or not worthy enough for a proper hunt. The Crothians were too aggressive, and their thick scales could turn aside her claws, so they were out of consideration. The Melthri were pack creatures who never traveled alone, and attacking one meant fighting 20. So they too were dismissed. The Vex were poisonous themselves, and their meat would make a poor trophy. So she passed them by as well, and then she saw him, a lone figure sat at the viewing port near the far wall, his body silhouetted against the endless black of space and the distant glitter of stars. That humans found so fascinating for reasons she could not begin to understand. He was holding something steaming in a ceramic cup and occasionally lifting it to his lips while his eyes remained fixed on the void outside. And everything about him screamed vulnerability to her trained hunter's gaze, soft-skinned with no scales or armor, plating to protect his vital organs from attack, no claws on his blunt fingers that she could see from this distance, no fangs visible in his flat mouth when he yawned and stretched his arms above his head. His eyes were small and dull, lacking the reflective layer that allowed proper predators to see in darkness, and his ears were tiny rounded things pressed flat against the sides of his skull. She pulled up his species file on her wrist computer and found the entry frustratingly brief: human. It read, from a planet called Earth in a system on the outer edge of explored space, recently spacefaring, having achieved faster than light travel only a few generations ago. Classification pending further study. The biological data was equally sparse, listing only basic information about oxygen requirements and temperature tolerances and nutritional needs. Nothing that suggested any special threat. Perfect, she thought as her venom glands pulsed with anticipation beneath the scales of her forearms. She watched him for another hour as the station's artificial day cycle wore on, learning his patterns and habits through careful observation. He muttered occasionally into a communication device pressed against his ear, talking about cargo manifests and delivery schedules and fuel costs in a language her translate chip rendered into flat, monotone words. A merchant, then, a hauler of goods between stations, one of the countless small traders who kept the economy of the galaxy moving through their endless journeys back and forth across the shipping lanes. He was alone. That much was clear from his conversations, and from the way no one approached him or waited for him, or seemed to know he existed. He was unarmed, except for what looked like a small blade tucked into his boot, visible only when he shifted position, and his pants leg rode up slightly. He was completely and utterly oblivious to the fact that death itself was watching him from across the room, and, planning his end, Vera felt a thrill run through her body as she made her decision and activated the marking ritual. Her scent glands released a specific pheromone cocktail into the air, a chemical signature that would cling to the human skin and clothes and mark him as claimed prey to any other Silveran hunter who might cross his path. The pheromones were undetectable to most species, just another smell in the overwhelming sensory chaos of the station. But to her people, they screamed ownership as loudly as a posted sign. "This one is mine," the scent declared to the universe, "and any who try to take him from me will face my wrath." The human did not react at all as the invisible marker settled onto him, did not twitch or sniff or show any sign that anything had changed in his environment. He simply kept staring at the stars and drinking his beverage and being completely unaware that he had just been claimed as prey by one of the most dangerous hunters in the galaxy. Vera filed her official hunt registration with the station's neutral AI system, which existed to track such things and ensure that hunters did not accidentally target protected species or diplomatic personnel. The AI confirmed her registration and informed her that the hunt would officially begin at the next cycle in 30 standard hours. 30 hours to stalk him and learn his weaknesses and find the perfect place to corner him. 30 hours to plan every detail of the kill and ensure that nothing could go wrong. 30 hours until she claimed her trophy and earned her place among the adults of her clan. She smiled as she watched him finally stand and stretch and begin walking toward the exit. And her needle teeth caught the light in a way that made a passing Melthery shudder and hurry away. This would be easy, she told herself as she began to follow at a careful distance. This would be the simplest Velthaner in her generation. A clean kill against helpless prey that would bring honor to her family name. The human vanished into the crowd ahead of her, completely unaware that he had already been marked for death. And Vera followed with the patient confidence of a predator who knew that her prey had nowhere to run. She had no way of knowing how terribly wrong she was about everything. She had no way of knowing what the word Deathworld meant or why it mattered. She had no way of knowing that the soft, helpless creature she had marked as easy prey came from a planet that had been trying to kill his species every single day for millions of years. But she would learn. Oh yes, she would learn. For 12 hours, Vera tracked her prey through the winding corridors and crowded marketplaces of Nexus Station 7. And in that time, she learned everything she thought she needed to know about the human called Marcus Cole. He was a creature of routine and habit, waking at the same time each cycle and following the same paths through the station as he conducted his business with the mechanical precision of someone who had done this exact same thing 1,000 times before. She watched him haggle with merchants over the price of fuel cells and replacement parts for his ship, his voice calm and patient, even when the sellers tried to cheat him with inflated prices and false claims about quality. She watched him eat at the same food stall 3 times, ordering the same bland nutrient paste each time and washing it down with that same steaming beverage that seemed to be his only vice. She watched him fall asleep on a public transport shuttle while traveling from one section of the station to another, his head lolling against the window, and his mouth hanging open slightly as soft sounds of breathing escaped his throat. The sight of him sleeping in public filled her with contempt. because no proper predator would ever make themselves so vulnerable in an unknown environment surrounded by strangers. Who could be threats? She documented everything. She observed with the meticulous attention to detail that her training had drilled into her since childhood. His schedule was predictable and easy to map, allowing her to know exactly where he would be at any given time. His quarters were secured with only a simple electronic lock that any competent hunter could bypass in seconds. His only weapon was that small blade in his boot, a pitiful tool that would do nothing against her armored scales and lightning reflexes. Everything she learned confirmed her initial assessment that this would be the easiest hunt of her life. A simple matter of finding the right moment and striking before he even knew death had come for him. But as the hours passed and she continued her observation, small details began to scratch at the back of her mind like an itch she could not reach. The first incident happened in the commercial district when a Crothian dock worker blocked the human's path and demanded payment for some imagined slight. Crothians were massive creatures, standing nearly 3 times the human's height, with jaws that could crush metal and claws that could tear through bulkheads. And they were known throughout the station for their violent tempers and quick fists. Vera had expected the human to flee or grovel or offer payment to make the threat go away, because that was what prey did when confronted by something bigger and stronger than themselves. Instead, Marcus Cole had simply stopped walking and looked up at the Crothian with an expression she could not quite read, his small, dull eyes meeting the predator's gaze, without flinching or looking away. For a long moment, neither of them moved or spoke, and something passed between them that Vera could not understand. Some silent communication that seemed to make the massive Crothian deeply uncomfortable. Then the dock worker had stepped aside and muttered something about crazy flat faces before stomping away to find easier targets. For his bullying, the human had simply continued on his way as if nothing unusual had happened, his heart rate unchanged according to her bioscanner and his body language showing no signs of the fear response she had expected to see. The second incident occurred in the market when a cooling conduit above one of the stalls had ruptured without warning and sprayed superheated chemical coolant across the crowded walkway. Every species in the area had scattered in panic, running and flying and slithering away from the burning liquid that could melt through skin and scales alike. And Vera herself had leaped backward to avoid the spray, but the human had moved in a different direction entirely, not away from the danger, but toward it. And she had watched in confusion as he grabbed a small Tethany juvenile who had frozen in terror and shielded the child with his own body. The coolant had splashed across his arm, and she had seen his flesh blister and redden even as he carried the child to safety and handed it to its frantically grateful parent. What happened next confused her even more than the act of self-sacrifice itself. Marcus Cole had examined his burned arm for a few seconds, then shrugged his shoulders in a gesture that seemed to dismiss the injury as unimportant, and pulled a small container from his pack. He had applied some kind of paste to the burned flesh with steady hands that showed no trembling from pain, wrapped a bandage around the wound with practiced efficiency, and then continued about his business, as if being burned by superheated chemicals was just a minor inconvenience. In his day, Vera had hunted dozens of species across half the galaxy, and she knew how living creatures responded to pain and injury, knew the fear and panic the damage to the body caused in every prey animal she had ever stalked. But this human had treated a wound that would have incapacitated most species as nothing more than an annoyance, something to be dealt with quickly and then forgotten about. The third incident was smaller, but somehow more disturbing in its implications. She had followed him into a section of the station where the environmental controls were malfunctioning. and the temperature had dropped far below the comfortable range for most species. Other beings hurried through the area as quickly as possible, their bodies shivering and their breath fogging in the cold air as they sought warmer sections of the station. The human had simply zipped up his jacket and kept walking at the same steady pace, his body showing no signs of distress from the cold that was making even Vera's scales ache. When he reached a heated section again, he had unzipped the jacket and continued on, not even commenting on the temperature change to himself or anyone else. It was as if extreme cold was just another thing that happened sometimes, not worthy of concern or complaint that night. In her quarters, Vera pulled up the file on Earth again and read through the sparse information with growing frustration. The planet was listed as having an oxygen-nitrogen atmosphere and moderate gravity and liquid water on its surface, all standard parameters for a life-bearing world. There was no mention of anything that would explain the strange behaviors she had observed. No warning flags or danger ratings or special notes about the species that had evolved there. Classification pending, the file said, and she cursed the bureaucratic slowness of the Galactic Survey Office that had clearly not bothered to properly study this new species before allowing them to travel freely through civilized space. She closed the file and told herself that she was overthinking things, that prey was prey regardless of how strangely it behaved, and that her training and instincts would carry her through the hunt as they always had. The human was soft and slow and weak, lacking every natural weapon that evolution had given to proper predators. And nothing she had seen changed that fundamental truth. Tomorrow she would find her killing ground and herd him toward it. And then the hunt would end as all hunts ended. With the prey dead and the predator victorious, she fell asleep with that certainty wrapped around her like a warm blanket, never suspecting that everything she believed about the nature of predators and prey was about to be shattered beyond repair. The soft, helpless human slept peacefully in his quarters that night. And if he dreamed at all, he did not dream of the death that was stalking him through the corridors of the station. He had grown up on Earth, after all, and compared to the things that lived there, one Silveran hunter was barely worth noticing. Vera had chosen her killing ground with all the care and precision that her years of training had taught her, spending hours studying the station's layout until she found the perfect place to end the hunt. The maintenance corridor in Sector 7 was ideal in every way that mattered to a hunter preparing for the final strike. It was located deep in the lower levels of the station, where few beings traveled and the security patrols rarely bothered to check because there was nothing of value to protect. The lighting was dim and irregular, casting pools of shadow that would allow her to remain hidden until the moment she chose to reveal herself. The corridor had only 2 exits, and by manipulating the door controls, she could ensure that her prey would be forced to walk the entire length of the passage to reach his destination. Most importantly, the ceiling was lined with exposed pipes and support struts that provided perfect perches for an ambush predator to wait above her prey until the moment was right. She had spent the final hours of the hunt cycle carefully herding Marcus Cole toward this place, manipulating crowd flows and triggering false maintenance alerts that closed certain corridors and left others open. The human had adapted to each obstacle with the same calm patience he showed in everything, simply checking his navigation device and finding alternate routes that happened to lead exactly where Vera wanted him to go. He had no idea that every choice he made was actually her choice, that every path he walked was one she had prepared for him, and that he was being guided toward his death by a predator who had planned every detail of his final moments. Now she crouched on a support beam near the middle of the corridor, her silver scales dulled with special powder that prevented them from catching the light and giving away her position. Her venom glands were fully charged and ready, the paralytic toxin that could drop a charging Crothian in seconds. flowing through the hollow spines on her forearms that she would use to deliver the killing dose. Below her, the corridor stretched empty and silent. The only sound the distant hum of the station's life support systems and the soft drip of condensation from the cooling pipes. She heard his footsteps before she saw him. The steady rhythm of boots on metal grating that announced his approach like a drumbeat counting down to his death. Her muscles tensed in anticipation as she prepared for the drop. Running through the sequence of moves one final time in her mind, she would fall on him from above, her weight driving him to the ground before he could react. Her right arm would sweep across his throat to slash the soft flesh there, while her left arm drove the venom spines into his shoulder. The paralytic would take effect in seconds, freezing his muscles and leaving him helpless while the blood poured from his ruined throat. It would be quick and clean and perfect. Exactly as the Velthaner demanded, Marcus Cole walked into view beneath her, his attention focused on the navigation device in his hand as he checked his route to wherever he thought he was going. His coffee cup was still in his other hand because apparently the human could not go anywhere without that steaming beverage that he seemed to find so important. Vera dropped from the ceiling with all the silent, deadly grace that 100 generations of Silverin hunters had perfected. What happened next did not match any of the scenarios she had trained for, or any of the outcomes she had imagined during her careful planning. The human moved not away from her as prey should move when attacked by a predator, not into a cowering defensive posture, as weak creatures did when confronted with their own mortality. He moved toward her, closing the distance between them before she could complete her attack, and his hand shot out to catch her striking arm in a grip that sent shock waves of pain through her entire body. She felt her bones grinding together under pressure that should not have been possible from fingers so blunt and small, and a scream of surprise and agony tore from her throat as her carefully planned attack fell apart around her. Her other arm swept toward his face with claws extended. A desperate strike meant to blind him and create an opening for escape, but he was already moving again. He shifted his weight and twisted his body in a way that used her own momentum against her. And suddenly she was flying through the air toward the corridor wall with no control over her trajectory. Her back slammed into the metal with enough force to drive the breath from her lungs, and her venom spines scraped uselessly against the surface. As she tried to find purchase, before she could recover, he was on her. His forearm pressed across her throat, and his body pinned against hers in a way that neutralized every weapon she possessed. His face was close to hers now, and she could see his eyes clearly for the first time, those small, dull eyes that she had dismissed as the mark of an inferior species. They were not dull at all. She realized with growing horror. They were calm. They were calculating. They were the eyes of something that had looked at her and decided that she was not a threat worth getting excited about. "I was wondering when you would make your move," Marcus Cole said, and his voice was as calm as his eyes, showing no fear or anger or any of the emotions that prey should feel when fighting for their lives. "You have been following me for 30 hours, and I have to admit I was getting a little bored waiting for you to finally try something." Vera tried to speak, but his arm was pressing too hard against her throat, and all that came out was a strangled hiss of frustration and fear. "I have to ask you something," he continued in that same conversational tone, as if they were discussing the weather instead of life and death. "Did your species really never bother to look up what a Deathworld is before you started hunting other beings across the galaxy?" She had no idea what he was talking about, and her confusion must have shown on her face because he made a sound that her translator identified as a chuckle. "Earth," he said, and something in his voice changed when he spoke the name of his homeworld, something that sounded almost like pride. "My planet. Where my species evolved is what the Galactic Survey Office classifies as a Category 12 Deathworld." The words meant nothing to Vera because she had never bothered to learn the classification system that the Survey Office used. I'd never seen any reason to study the rankings and categories that bureaucrats assign to distant planets. Category 12 means that everything on my world is trying to kill everything else all the time, Marcus explained. The weather tries to kill us with hurricanes and tornadoes and blizzards and heat waves and floods and droughts and lightning strikes and 100 other ways that I could list if we had all day. His arm relaxed slightly on her throat. Not enough for her to break free, but enough for her to breathe and listen. The ground itself tries to kill us with earthquakes and volcanoes and sinkholes and landslides and tsunamis that can wipe out entire cities in minutes. The water is full of things with teeth and poison and crushing tentacles that have been perfecting the art of killing for millions of years before my ancestors climbed down from the trees. The land has predators that can run faster than we can, and predators that can climb better than we can, and predators that can see in the dark when we are blind, and predators that can smell us from miles away. Even the tiny things that you cannot see can kill us. The bacteria and viruses and parasites that have been waging war against our bodies. Since the first cell divided into two, Vera listened with growing horror as the human described his homeworld. And for the first time, she began to understand how badly she had miscalculated. My ancestors did not survive by being faster or stronger, or more venomous than the things that hunted them, Marcus said. They survived by being stubborn and clever and absolutely refusing to die no matter how hard the universe tried to kill them. There is a type of hunting that my species invented called persistence hunting. And do you want to know how it works? She did not answer, but he told her anyway. We would pick a prey animal and start chasing it. And the animal would run away because it was faster than us and it thought it could escape. But we did not stop chasing it. The animal would run until it was tired and then stop to rest. And we would keep coming. It would run again and stop. Again, and we would keep coming. We would chase that animal for hours and hours and hours under the hot sun until it collapsed from exhaustion and heat, stroke, and could not run anymore. And then we would walk up to it and kill it with sharpened sticks while it lay there unable to move. That is what humans are, Marcus said, and his calm eyes bored into hers. We are the monsters that never stop coming. We are the nightmare that follows you until you cannot run anymore. And you marked me as prey. He laughed again, and the sound made her scales crawl. With a fear she had never felt before in her entire life. That was a mistake. Vera could not move, and the realization filled her with a terror more complete than anything she had ever experienced in her life. Every technique she had learned since childhood for escaping holds and reversing attacks had failed against the human's grip, and her muscles burned with exhaustion from her useless struggles. Her venom spines were positioned perfectly to strike at his exposed flesh, but he had somehow known exactly where they were and angled his body to stay clear of their reach. Her claws scraped against his jacket without finding purchase because the material was tougher than it looked. Some kind of reinforced fabric that turned aside her razor edges like they were nothing. She was pinned and helpless and completely at the mercy of a creature she had dismissed as harmless prey. And the humiliation of her position burned almost as hot as her fear. The human seemed content to simply hold her there against the wall, his breathing steady and his heartbeat calm, as if restraining a trained Silveran hunter required no more effort than holding a squirming child. Your species file on humans is missing some important details, he said in that same conversational tone that made everything he said somehow more terrifying than if he had been screaming threats at her. Let me fill in the gaps for you, since your people clearly did not do their research before deciding to hunt mine. He adjusted his grip slightly, and she felt fresh pain lance through her arm where his fingers were pressing against the joint. A reminder that he could break her bones whenever he chose to do so. I already told you about persistence hunting and how my Ancestors chased prey until it died of exhaustion, he continued. But that was just the beginning of what makes humans dangerous. You see, my species has this thing called an adrenaline response that kicks in when we are threatened or frightened. Our bodies flood with chemicals that increase our strength and speed and pain tolerance, and we become capable of things that should be physically impossible. Mothers have lifted vehicles that weigh thousands of pounds to free their trapped children. Wounded soldiers have kept fighting for hours with injuries that should have killed them instantly. Ordinary people have survived falls and crashes, and attacks that should have reduced them to nothing but meat and bone fragments. Vera tried to speak, to say something that might convince him to let her go. But her throat was too dry, and her mind was too frozen with fear to form coherent words. We heal from almost anything given enough time, Marcus said. Broken bones knit back together in weeks. Torn muscles regenerate themselves. We can lose limbs and keep living. Can lose eyes and keep seeing with the ones that remain. Can lose so much blood that we should be dead and still somehow survive if we get medical care fast enough. Your venom that you were so proud of. The paralytic toxin that you thought would drop me in seconds. I looked up the chemical composition in the station's medical database after I noticed you following me. It would have worked on me for about 5 minutes before my liver filtered it out of my bloodstream. And then I would have been very angry and still very much alive. He released the pressure on her throat slightly, and she gasped for air, her lungs burning from the sudden rush of oxygen. But the most important thing that makes humans dangerous is not our endurance or our healing or our adrenaline. He said, "It is this." He tapped his free hand against the side of his head. We think, we plan. We learn from every encounter and adapt our strategies and never make the same mistake twice. Your species has been hunting sapient beings for 3,000 years, and you have gotten very good at it. I will give you that much credit, but you have never hunted anything that hunts back. You have never faced prey that watches you watching them and makes plans of their own. I knew you were following me from the second hour. I knew you were a Silveran hunter on your Velthaner by the third hour because I looked up your pheromone signature in the station's species database. I knew which corridor you would choose for your ambush by the 8th hour because I have been studying Silveran hunting patterns since your people first started picking off traders in the outer systems 5 years ago. Everything you thought you were controlling was actually me letting you think you were in control. Vera felt her understanding of the universe crumbling around her as she listened to the human describe how thoroughly she had been outmaneuvered. She had thought herself the hunter and him the prey. But the truth was exactly the opposite. He had been stalking her from the moment she first marked him, watching him, and waiting patiently for her to spring a trap that he had already prepared a counter for. There is another thing about humans that you should probably know, Marcus said. And something in his tone shifted slightly toward what might have been amusement. We have this instinct that your species database definitely did not mention called pack bonding. It means that we form emotional attachments to things. Not just other humans, but anything that we spend enough time around. We domesticated wolves, which are pack predators with jaws that can crush bone. By feeding them and playing with them until they loved us more than they loved their own kind. We keep animals in our homes as companions. Creatures that serve no practical purpose except to make us happy by existing near us. We have been known to risk our lives for beings that are not even our own species. To fight and die for creatures that we have decided belong to our pack. He nodded toward the direction of the marketplace, that Tethany child I saved from the coolant spill. I had never met that child before that moment, and will probably never see it again. But for those few seconds, it was mine to protect. And I would have let that coolant burn my arm off completely before I let it touch that kid. That is what humans do. We adopt things into our pack, and then we will burn down the entire galaxy to keep them safe. Now imagine what we do to things that threaten our pack. He leaned closer, and his voice dropped to something that was almost a whisper. You chose the wrong prey. Little hunter, you marked a Deathworlder who has survived things that would give your entire species nightmares. I have walked through asteroid storms and radiation zones, and one time the life support on my ship failed, and I spent 6 hours breathing recycled air that was slowly poisoning me while I made repairs. I have fought off pirates and escaped quarantine zones and talked my way out of situations that should have ended with me, dead in a ditch somewhere. This hunt, your sacred Velthaner that you have trained your entire life for, this is not even in my top 20 most dangerous Tuesdays. He released her, just like that. Without warning, his hands left her body and he stepped back. And Vera slumped against the wall with her legs barely able to hold her. Wait, she stared at him with wide eyes full of confusion and fear and something that might have been the beginning of respect. He could have killed her. He had demonstrated clearly that he was capable of ending her life whenever he chose to do so. And by every law of nature and survival, she should be dead right now. But instead, he bent down and picked up his coffee cup, which had somehow landed upright on the floor without spilling, and took a calm sip as if they had just finished discussing the weather. Your hunt is over, he said. You failed the Velthaner, and I am guessing that means something pretty bad for you when you go home. But you are going to go home alive, which is more than you deserve after trying to murder an innocent person for a coming-of-age ritual. He looked at her with those calm, calculating eyes that she now understood had never been dull at all. Here is some free advice that might save your life and the lives of your clan members in the future. Update your species database, because the next human you try this on might not be as patient as me. He turned and walked away down the corridor, his footsteps steady and unhurried. And Vera could only watch him go with her entire worldview shattered into pieces at her feet. She had come here as a predator and discovered that she was prey. She had marked a human for death and learned that her people had been hunting monsters without ever realizing what they were. The universe was not what she had been taught it was, and nothing would ever be the same again. The journey back to the Silverin clan ship felt like the longest voyage of Vera's life, every hour stretching into eternity as she contemplated the fate that awaited her upon arrival. She had failed the Velthanoran 4 generations of her family. Line no hunter had ever returned from the sacred hunt without a trophy, and the shame of her failure burned in her chest like acid, eating through metal by the ancient traditions of her people. She should be executed for bringing such dishonor upon her clan, her body thrown into the void between stars where her spirit would wander forever without rest. But she had something more important than her own life to think about now. A warning that her people needed to hear before more hunters walked blindly into the same trap she had stumbled into. Human had let her live, and she was beginning to understand that he had done so deliberately, not out of weakness or mercy, but because he wanted her to carry a message back to her people. She was not a survivor of a failed hunt. She was a messenger delivering a warning from a species that her people had badly underestimated. The clan ship was waiting in orbit around the Raiden Medeon around small moon when her shuttle docked, and Vera felt the weight of 1,000 judgmental eyes upon her as she walked through the corridors toward the council chamber. Other hunters stepped aside as she passed, their expressions showing a mixture of pity and contempt for the failed warrior who had somehow managed to return alive without her prey. She held her head high and kept walking because she knew something they did not. Knew that every single one of them would have failed just as completely if they had faced what she had faced. The council chamber was vast and ancient, its walls decorated with the trophies of 10,000 successful hunts stretching back across 3 millennia of Silverin history. The matriarch sat upon her throne of bone and metal at the far end of the room. Her scales dulled with age, but her eyes still sharp and piercing as they watched Vera approach. Around her sat the elders of the clan, the greatest hunters of their generation, who had earned their places through countless successful kills, and who now judged all who came before them. Vera knelt before the throne and waited in silence for permission to speak. Her heart's pounding so hard, she was certain everyone in the room could hear them. "You have returned without your prey," the matriarch said, and her voice echoed through the chamber like the tolling of a funeral bell. "By the laws of the Velfanar, this failure is punishable by death. Do you have anything to say before judgment is passed?" Vera raised her head and met the matriarch's ancient eyes with a steady gaze that surprised even herself. "I request the right of final testimony. Matriarch, I have information that threatens the survival of our entire species, and I ask that I be allowed to share it before I die." A murmur ran through the assembled elders at her words, and the matriarch raised one clawed hand to silence them. "That is a bold claim. Child, very well, you may speak, but choose your words carefully. If this is merely an attempt to delay your execution with meaningless excuses, your death will be far slower than tradition demands." Vera stood and pulled a data crystal from her belt, holding it up so that everyone in the chamber could see. This crystal contains detailed scans of human physiology, environmental data on their homeworld of Earth, and my own recorded testimony of my encounter with one of their species. She inserted the crystal into the council's holographic projector and the air above, them filled with images and charts and biological diagrams. "The Galactic Survey Office classifies Earth as a Category 12 Deathworld," she said. "I did not know what that meant until the human I was hunting explained it to me while he held me pinned against a wall with no more effort than a parent restraining a misbehaving child." The elders shifted uncomfortably at her description, but no one interrupted as she continued. "Category 12 is the highest danger rating that the survey office assigns to any planet. It means that the world in question is actively hostile to life in every possible way, with environmental conditions so extreme that sapient species should not be able to evolve there at all." She gestured at the holographic display, and images of Earth appeared, showing hurricanes and earthquakes and volcanic eruptions and tsunamis, and all the other disasters that the human had described to her. Their weather organizes itself into spinning columns of wind that can destroy entire cities. Their ground shakes and splits open without warning, swallowing buildings and killing thousands in seconds. Their oceans are filled with predators that have been perfecting the art of killing for hundreds of millions of years. The biological data scrolled across the display, showing the creatures that shared Earth with humans. And gasps of horror filled the chamber as the elders saw what the soft, helpless-looking species had evolved alongside sharks, with rows of regenerating teeth that never stopped growing, crocodiles that had remained virtually unchanged for over 200 million years because they were already perfect killing machines. Great cats that could run faster than any Silverin and take down prey 10 times their size. Bears that stood taller than a Crothian and could crush bone with a single swipe of their paws. Venomous snakes and spiders and jellyfish and octopi and 1,000 other deadly creatures that filled every corner of the planet. Humans evolved on this world, Vera said. They survived not by being the fastest or the strongest or the most venomous, but by being the most stubborn and adaptable creatures their planet had ever produced. She pulled up the data on human physiology and pointed to the relevant sections. Their endurance exceeds any species in the galactic database. They can run for hours without stopping, chasing prey until it collapses from exhaustion. They heal from injuries that would kill most beings, regrowing bone and muscle and skin given enough time. They have a chemical response to danger that temporarily increases their strength and speed and pain tolerance to superhuman levels. And most dangerous of all, they think, they plan and adapt and learn from every encounter, and they never make the same mistake twice. She turned to face the matriarch directly. I was outmaneuvered from the moment I first marked my prey. The human knew I was following him. within hours, and spent the rest of the time watching me watching him, learning my tactics and preparing countermeasures. When I finally made my attack, he neutralized me in seconds, without even elevating his heart rate. He could have killed me easily, but he chose not to, and I believe I understand why. He sent me back to deliver a warning. The chamber was completely silent now, every elder hanging on her words with expressions that had shifted from contempt to growing concern. "We have been hunting humans for 5 years," Vira said. "In that time, we have taken 17 of them as trophies. 17 successful hunts that we celebrated as proof of our superiority. But humans are pack bonders. Matriarch. They form emotional attachments to each other that are stronger than anything our species has ever experienced. Every hunter we sent after them, every trophy we claimed, was not just a kill to them. It was the murder of a family member. And they remember, they learn, they adapt." She let that sink in for a moment before continuing. "The human who defeated me was a simple cargo hauler, a trader with no special training or equipment. If an ordinary human could humble a trained Silveran hunter so easily, imagine what their warriors could do. Imagine what would happen if they decided that 17 murders were enough, and it was time to hunt us back." The matriarch was silent for a long moment, her ancient eyes fixed on the holographic display, still showing Earth's endless parade of horrors. "You were marked as the failure here," she finally said, her voice heavy with something that might have been respect. "But I believe you may have saved our species from a catastrophic mistake. If we had continued hunting humans without understanding what they truly are, we would have eventually provoked a response that we could not survive." She turned to address the full council. "The Velthaner will be amended effective immediately. All Deathworld species are hereby excluded from the sacred hunt. Any hunter who violates this decree will be executed without trial." 3 cycles later, the Silveran Dominion formally requested diplomatic relations with the Terran Republic, and the official documents included a detailed explanation of the Velthaner tradition and a formal apology for the 17 human lives that had been taken before they understood what they were hunting. The Terran Republic accepted the apology and agreed to open diplomatic channels, though their response included a note stating that the families of the deceased would be receiving substantial reparation payments from Silveran accounts. Vera was pardoned for her failed hunt and given a new role as cultural liaison between her people and the humans, a position that required her to study human history and customs so that she could help her species avoid any future misunderstandings with the Deathworlders. She learned many things in that role, learned about human art and music and literature and all the beautiful things they had created alongside their capacity for violence. But the thing that stayed with her most, the thing she thought about late at night when sleep would not come, was a single image she had found in a human history database. It showed a group of ancient humans standing over the corpse of a massive predator, their primitive spears stained with blood and their faces showing expressions of triumph. The predator had been larger and stronger and faster than them, had been designed by evolution to kill and eat creatures like them. And they had killed it anyway with nothing but pointed sticks and stubborn refusal to die. That was what humans were. That was what her people had been hunting, without ever understanding, and she was grateful every day that she had lived long enough to learn the truth. Far away on Nexus Station 7, Marcus Cole finished his cargo run and filed his delivery reports with the same calm efficiency he brought to everything he did. His arm had healed from the coolant burn, leaving only a small scar that would fade with time. And he had already forgotten about the Silveran hunter who had tried to kill him in a maintenance corridor. It was not that the encounter had been unimportant, just that it had been so routine compared to everything else he had survived that it barely registered as worth remembering. He complained, to his ship's own eye that the coffee on the station had been pretty mediocre, honestly, and plotted his course for the next delivery. Somewhere out there, the galaxy was learning to fear humans. But Marcus Cole was just a cargo hauler doing his job, and that, perhaps, was the most terrifying thing of all. The end.